Welcome to the Purpose for Life podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Roberts. I'm the author of It's Deeper Than That and the founder of The Great Reconnection. And I'm thrilled to have with us today Max Klau, who's the founder of the Center for Courageous Wholeness. And thank you so much for being with us, Max.
Thank you for having me, Suzanne. Really glad to be here.
Thank you. What is the Center for Courageous Wholeness and what is Courageous Wholeness?
The center is an educational institution focused on supporting organizations and individuals in developing what I call shadow integrated servant leaders.
Will
And
you just
so
say that
let's,
again?
yes, we develop shadow integrated servant leaders.
Thank you.
So let me start with the second part servant leadership. This is an ancient idea that, the kind of highest spiritual level is when we live our life in service to others. It also has a modern incarnation with Robert Greenleaf. And the idea is we are focused on the growth and development of others, not on feeding our own hungers for power or wealth or love, right? And just we
Mm,
need a lot more servant leaders in the world. We see a lot of examples of people who are driven by ego and their own needs to be significant. So it's servant leadership. But the other piece, and this is where courageous wholeness comes in, is it is about integrating our shadow. The idea is very simple that every light casts a shadow. Every human being contains both light and shadow. And courageous wholeness means summoning the courage to take a look at our shadow, the parts of ourselves that we are not comfortable with. We don't like, we have stuck it in the shadow because it doesn't fit how we like to think about ourselves. But courageous wholeness is about taking a look at that and recognizing that we are all our light and our shadow. And the more that we can work skillfully with our light and our shadow, the more then we can actually live, bring our light into the world and live with integrity to our mission, rather than allowing our shadow to influence our actions from beyond our awareness. So it is about kind of doing the work of courageously looking at our own inner wholeness, and that's where the name comes from.
well, you said a lot there, and I'm going to focus on a few of the things that you said
Yeah.
independently so we can dig in a little deeper on this. Because, first of all, it's a statement to think about living, serving instead of feeding our ego. So, how do we become of service to another? And that within that, we have maybe our own kind of mission for serving, something that calls us to serve. But then when you talk about the shadow, you said something about if we don't address the shadow could take over or lead without us being conscious that it's leading. And then maybe I'm just throwing this out there as a thought that while I think I'm a servant leader, if my shadow's taking over, I'm actually feeding my ego while I'm quote serving. Is that
Yes,
something that could show up, or how could we
absolutely.
understand that? Say,
Absolutely. So to provide a little more context, I always say I'm a service person. I'm an alum of four different international service programs, and in my 20s, I was just constantly going to Honduras and Ghana and Ukraine and Israel and doing service programs. And my whole career has been in the world of service. So I was 10 years at an AmeriCorps program called City Year, with young adults doing a year of service in high need schools, making sure,
mm,
supporting students to be academically successful. So I've spent my time around people who have made life choices to serve others. And a lot of my work is just how do we develop them as skillfully as possible. And I have learned by being an idealist myself and being surrounded by other idealistic people that if we are only focused on our noble aspirations and not conscious of our own shadows, it is not all that unusual to want to be of service to people and to show up. I mean, my journey was showing up with some real problematic kind of savior complex, a real belief that I had the answers and other people needed me to fix them. There's a whole world of really problematic assumptions that I know was part of my journey that I had to uh, go through a process of recognizing that I had some ego in this and a need to feel like a good person. And by confronting my own shadow, I was able to see that and then truly show up in ways that were of service to others and focused on the growth and development of others rather than my own need to see myself as a particular, kind of savior of others. So that gives you a little sense of why it's important for people who are focused on serving others to take a look at their shadow.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us, Max. How did you become aware that you were aiming to be a savior, to have importance?
Well, my first book is called Race and Social Change, and it part of it is my doctoral dissertation, where I had a chance to study systemic racism in a really kind of unique way. And the book also goes into detail about my journey as kind of a privileged white person who cared a lot about race and just again and again and again encountered moments where I realized I was blind to my own privilege. I did not understand how kind of how much internalized privilege I had that showing up in places assuming that I had the answers and knew better than other people and it was my job to help them or fix them.
Mm,
Many opportunities of being in spaces that were about exploring issues of justice and equity where I had to realize I had a lot to unlearn. And somewhere along that way I did a really powerful personal growth experience that for the first time introduced me to the concept of shadow, and I realized how relevant that was to this journey of really trying to be to actually be of service, which meant uh, starting to see my own blind spots.
and you have the word courage, Center for Courageous Wholeness. It takes courage and bravery to face into our shadow self and not
Yeah.
punish ourselves for it, but welcome it. How do you think people can do that?
Yeah, well, anytime you talk about shadow, you have to talk about Carl Jung, who wrote a lot about shadow, and he's just got a bunch of quotes about how confronting the shadow is the first test of courage on the inner way, and because the idea is when we take a look at this, it challenges our identity as somebody who's purely good, and it is
Mm,
scary to do that.
mhm.
So Carl Jung is very clear of this inner work takes courage, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of people resist it. And the reason why I just wrote my second book was because it took me literally years, like 6 or 7 years of trial and error to figure out how do you invite people into this work in a way that is effective when so many people are resistant to it, so many people are afraid of it. And it's part of what my own journey has been of, I was trying to figure out how do you do this at scale? How do you get 1,500 AmeriCorps members to take a look at their shadow? And so much of it was about how do you frame it for them? How do you invite them into it? How do you hold that space? And it took a while, but I figured out how to do this so that thousands of people are willing to go there.
I'm coming back to this. How do I look at parts of myself? I'm going to say it again, but how do we look at parts of ourselves without punishing ourselves for things that we don't perceive or think are noble, or chip away at that we're not all good, you know?
Yeah, well, when I kind of felt called to do this, I was, again, I tell the story in my book of feeling like I was at this organization where there was all this dark energy and not a way to talk about it. And I felt like I think it would be of service to bring shadow to my organization. And part of me was like, are you crazy bringing all this dark stuff into the room? And it'll, it could just be painful and damaging to people. What I found, and this has stayed consistent for 20 years of doing this, is it actually helps people hold themselves with more compassion. Because what happens is
Mm.
if we can't talk about shadow, if we don't say this is just part of being human, then we hold a lot of judgment and a lot of shame for having parts of ourselves that are not noble. But when we can just say, hey, everybody, this is just the way the world is, and this is what it means to be human. And so as a community, we're going to look at this. It lets people be with themselves and be with others with a lot more compassion. And I actually think it's the not talking honestly about shadow that leaves people kind of awash in judgment and shame about parts of ourselves that we're not proud of.
So it's actually life-giving.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
what I appreciate what you're saying, and I also hear this in the title of your second book, this is a personal and collective or personal systemic invitation. And when you're talking about scale, when we're scaling leaders or when we're scaling communities or organizations, whatever we're scaling, to bring this work in for the greatest outcome. And it sounds like then people would be able to be engaged in their work more wholly, like with more of themselves or something.
Absolutely. On the individual level, yes, people are able to hold themselves with more compassion, to work more skillfully with their shadow, to notice. I mean, Carl Jung says we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that
Oh, I love that.
idea of when we can look at it and catch it in the moment, we become much, much better at like, oh, I have this right now, I'm sliding into my shadow. I have kind of a choice point that now I can see, and I can consciously choose what it looks like to respond from my mission versus then from my shadow. And that's the whole idea is when we look at it and become conscious of it, we can work with it more skillfully. But of course, on a collective level, this kind of aggregates up to the current nightmare we're living in. When I look at the headlines, I see unconfronted shadow everywhere, just demonization and dehumanization and polarization, and people living in this illusion that there's an us and a them, and we're purely good and they're purely bad. And if we could just beat them, then everything would be fine. That whole consciousness is creating a, a nightmare. And I'm one of the reasons why I feel called to this is I just feel like as a species, we have hit the limits of our ability to respond to everything unfolding all around us without confronting shadow. We have tried to treat things as technical solutions. We have tried to just deal with it as like these are policy decisions or this is the next thing we need to do at this moment in time. This is a deep spiritual challenge that we have avoided, and we can no longer avoid it.
Or if we do, we're just leading to greater destruction and
Yeah, I
dehumanization.
mean, the more we avoid it, the more it just comes back at us with more and more power.
I think it's fascinating to think about light cannot live as light without darkness because we live in the world of duality. We live in the world of polarity and we have light and dark, or we have light and shadow. And if we don't hold both of them, then there isn't light
Exactly.
ultimately, right? So
And
there,
I do think every spiritual tradition honors the interconnectedness of these things. And to live in a
Mhm.
consciousness of the light is good and the shadow is bad is a limited, problematic consciousness. And when you look at the world, there's night and day, there's
Right.
sunlight and mud, there's, life and death, and like everything holds both of those things. And the idea that one is good and one is bad is really a problem. We need both of them to be fully alive
And to be whole, like what you
and to be
the
whole.
courageous wholeness means we exist within both of them. And I think we become better human beings. I was writing an article today about what does it mean to love? What and who do we love and how do we love? And if it's important in the research I was doing around it, it's important to overcome animalistic or self-interested impulses, and which do dehumanize and other. And we have to admit that we have these, I'm going to call them animalistic or lower mind or whatever you want to call it, and self
Absolutely.
interested impulses, and have enough ability to observe, to choose, like what you were talking about. But if we pretend like we don't have them, well, I'm saying what you said before, but we'll just act them out and we'll
Yeah.
produce harm. And I
Yeah.
think what you're asking us is to say, do we want to produce harm or do we want to generate actually goodwill towards others in a real way, is what I'm hearing you say, in a certain way.
Well, and I also I think a lot about how should we understand human beings? Because clearly, the idea that we're all rational actors who view the world and make rational choices, that is clearly not the case.
Right.
You know, but what I am arriving at is we have a deep spiritual need to see ourselves as good and like to live in kind of the illusion that we are part of an innocent group, that our group is the good group and we are not complicit in problems and we are pure good and the other people are darkness and evil, because it is spiritually challenging for us to own that we have darkness and we are complicit in systems that are not the world we want to live in, and it's spiritually and psychologically challenging to own that and work with it within ourselves. And so I see a lot of people just kind of like, I'm going to connect with a group of people who we're all just going to collectively agree that the way we understand the world is good, and the way anybody who disagrees with us, they're bad. And by being part of this group, I can just live with this collective belief that we're the good guys, you know? And I just see that, that's not, that transcends part, like, red and blue and right and left. It is, you, you see it everywhere. And I'm a big fan of the Einstein quote that no problem can be solved with the same level of thinking that created it. And
Mhm.
so, what does it mean to step into a higher consciousness where there's no good and bad? There's just people at different points on the journey of working skillfully with their wholeness.
I'm curious. You said something about spiritually, we want to see ourselves as good. And I'm going to reframe that or think about possibly reframing that. I perceive our spiritual calling to be whole, which means to contain birth and death,
Yes.
and that it's our worldly compulsion that drives us to only see ourselves as good. So, do you said spiritually we want to see ourselves good? Is it spiritually or is it like uh,
Psychologically, maybe we say
psychologically? Yeah,
psychologically.
I want to make that distinction because I think
Yeah.
psychologically, and I would say psychologically also engaged with our identity in the world. Because one of the things when I think about your work, Max, it's about doing inner work. So, in some ways, it's withdrawing from my identity in the world to discover what's inside of me so that I can address my own wholeness. And then it's about being in service. But it's almost like pausing and observing the identity or the proof of self in the world. I don't know how else to say it, but some way to pause from that and do some kind of interior exploration.
Yeah.
Does that
Well,
make sense?
yeah. I mean, what comes up for me is two key ideas. The first is wholeness is always a paradox, where on the one hand, it's always present, it is the deepest truth. And
Yes.
on the other hand, we're always searching for it, and
Yes.
we'll never get there. So, this idea of it's the truth of who we are and we're always working towards it, we can hold both of those things at the same time. And then the other idea is, I think about adult development, very inspired by Ken Wilber,
Yeah.
of it's always about include and transcend. Of development is always about including our current way of being, our current mental models, but then transcending it to something larger where we can hold that, but also have access to a larger, kind of wider context that recontextualizes the previous kind of state of development. So it's not like stepping away, and it's certainly not about our old identity is wrong and we have to destroy it, but we do have to step beyond it into something larger
Mhm.
that transcends it. And that is very much what opening ourselves to light and shadow does. We may have a identity of we are light, and we're invited to include that, but then transcend it to a different consciousness that holds both our light and our shadow and allows us to work with all of that in a more skillful way.
It's not trying to get rid of something, it's including more.
Yeah, and
And
achieving a bigger mind and a wider consciousness that can hold it all.
it's so interesting. I was working with a coaching client yesterday on Wall Street, and we were looking at the mind. And I think we have three aspects to our mind. Just like in polarity, we have positive, negative, and neutral. We have a superconscious mind in the ideal world, which would be our higher self or the positive pole. The neutral mind would be the conscious mind, the ability to observe. Right? That's
Mm.
and then the unconscious mind is the negative pole. And I would say the shadow would be more in the unconscious mind. And if we bring it, don't let it be the positive pull so that it's dictating us, but bring awareness to it so it can be observed. Then once it's observed, it can then be guided by
Yes.
the higher self. So there's um, rerouting the polarities in a certain kind of way. If we just look at magnetism or how, and then,
Yeah.
do you know what
I
I'm
know you're
saying?
an expert at, I'll be honest, the polarities is not a model that I'm
Yeah.
super familiar with. But that basic idea, and Jung talks about this all the time, of if we haven't confronted it, then it influences our actions from beyond our awareness.
Yes.
So it's in our unconscious, and we
Yes.
project it outwards. The parts of ourselves we haven't claimed, we see in some other.
Yep.
So I can't speak skillfully to how that maps onto the
Yes.
polarities model that you're so familiar with, but there's a lot that resonates there.
Yeah, there's a resonance to it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that also when we look at the unconscious mind or the shadow when it's undigested, then it keeps us from actually being able to physically be restored through our parasympathetic nervous system. So we're more tired, we're less vibrant, we don't have access to a greater resource inside of us or our greater wholeness. So it behooves us at a health level to also address the shadow inside of us so we're not carrying this burden with us that's,
Right.
I'm going to say, not digested in its own way. So this is very exciting information. I think it's really important for all of us to think about what does it actually mean to be in a human body and to actually maybe perhaps really become human,
Yeah.
which means
Yeah.
living with these contradictions, right? We need to be able to hold difference with um,
Within ourselves.
within
I mean, never mind. I mean,
ourselves.
within
Yeah.
ourselves, never mind with everybody else. Absolutely.
If we can't do it
Yeah. And
inside, we can't do it outside, I don't think.
if the world around us is polarized and divided and separated from itself and in conflict with itself, I start from the assumption that the world around us is a reflection of the world within us. And if we want to start calling forth more wholeness and more compassion and more um, interdependence and interconnection, we need to work with that within ourselves.
Hmm.
you know and I should say I've had the privilege in the last few years to do this with politicians, like people who are thinking about running from every level, from school board to Congress. And one of the reasons I'm so committed to this is, I tell the story of one example of somebody who came through our program somebody who had been through a U.S. military academy, was special forces. When we met him, he was getting his master's at an Ivy League university. He was thinking about running for Congress, and this was somebody who had the biography and the credentials and the network to be a viable candidate for Congress. And he had never heard of shadow. And he said, when we invited him to go through this work of crafting his mission in shadow, he said, I've never heard of this, and my shadow mission is every politician I hate. And this idea that right now it is not possible, it's likely you could go through some of the most formative, character shaping institutions in American civic life and be on path to have power at the national level and have never even encountered this idea. That is the world we live in, you know?
Mm.
And to me, that makes the headlines make a lot of sense, you know?
Hmm.
So again, we've hit the limits of our ability to ignore this stuff.
And on a practical daily basis, how do you stay connected to doing shadow work inside yourself?
Well, I just built an app, Suzanne, as you
You
know. I mean,
did.
I've done this training. I've led thousands of people through this, and always, and in a very concrete sense, I do this through two related activities. One is having people craft a personal leadership mission, which is always kind of noble and inspiring and their highest aspirations. And then the shadow mission is, look at how you're being in the moments you're not living with alignment or integrity to your mission. So I will say there's a lot of ways to talk about shadow. This is calibrated for professional context. We're not inviting people to go to their traumas or their wounds. We're inviting people to think about shadow in a way that's actually safe in a non-therapeutic
Mm,
context. You know, um,
mm.
and after guiding thousands of people through it and saying, so how are you going to stay present? I've built an app where you can actually put your mission and shadow into the app, and it will send you regular reminders and give you daily activities you can do just a minute or two to just stay present. Because, inner clarity that is forgotten is not helpful. Once you get the clarity, it's how do you make sure that you live and lead with integrity to that. So I'm trying to be as creative as I can around supporting people in that.
That's awesome, and then how do you support yourself in that?
Well, it helps that I do this all the time. I'm talking about it all the time, and I've actually, I really love my app. I've been using it. I get these daily reminders. It's kind of like this is something I've been looking for a long time. Just a little 2-minute activity of how are
Mm,
you projecting things today, and what
mm.
would it look like to offer compassion to your own shadow today? So, um, and the fact that this is now my professional life, so I just spend a lot of time thinking about it and talking about it.
I love that. I just tried out the app, but I didn't opt in to get the feedback yet, so I'm excited to do that, and,
Yeah, and it's still in pilots. You are one
yeah,
of the first people to even
thank you.
get the link to it. So
Thank you.
thank
I'm
you for
yeah,
helping
so
out.
but world
Yeah.
down the road, you're gonna have a
Stay tuned.
great
Stay
asset.
tuned.
Stay tuned. Thank you so much. We're gonna need to wind down now. I love to ask my guests this question. What do you think the purpose for life is?
Listen, I do think we all are called to something,
Mm,
and it's very different for everybody. And the work is to listen carefully for whatever you feel called to do. How are you going to use your gifts
mm,
and your life to be of service? And uh, part of it is learning how to listen to that and trust it. And for me, it's about helping other people do that. I've certainly had years of trying to find my mission, and then realized what I can do is help other people listen for that calling and find their own path forward. So that's what I'm here to do.
I love that. And Max, how can people get a hold of you?
So check out www.centerforcourageouswholeness.org, and you can find a bunch of stuff there, a bunch of resources. You can also reach out to me via the context form, but centerforcourageouswholeness.org is how to learn more about all of this.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I know our listeners are going to get so much out of this and maybe even listen twice because there is really great material here. Thank you
Great.
so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Suzanne. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, we're winding down today, another episode of The Purpose for Life, and we so appreciate you subscribing and joining in. And make sure you are ready for the next one. We have one every week, and the first of the month, we have a wisdom drop with my co pilot, Monu Singh. Thank you for being with us today. I'm your host, Suzanne Roberts, and until next time, thank you.